You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. For most people, a sex toy is just a fun gadget. It's something that you buy to add a novel sensation to masturbation or partnered sex. Or maybe it's something that you purchase to help deal with a sexual problem or issue. However, sex toys represent so much more than that. In this episode, we're going to be talking about why sex toys should be seen as experiences and not just objects, and how they can actually transform your relationship, both the one you have with yourself and the one that you have with your partner. We'll also explore the process behind how sex toys are designed and developed, what makes a toy truly great, how to tell which toys are worth your money and which ones aren't, as well as how sex toys can help us to rekindle the connection in a relationship and how they can help us to improve our overall sexual communication. I am joined by Venus O'Hara, a pleasure educator, author, and content creator. She became Spain's first professional sex toy tester and since 2014 has tested and reviewed over 1,000 products from leading sexual wellness brands worldwide. She has also authored 4 books on sexuality and empowerment, with her latest being titled Orgasmic Manifestation. Her podcast, The Orgasmic Lifestyle, explores what it means to reach climax in all areas of life, from sexuality and relationships to purpose and prosperity. This is going to be a fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. If you love the science of sex as much as I do, consider becoming a friend of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. The Kinsey Institute is the world's premier research organization on sex and relationships, and you can help them continue the legacy of Dr. Alfred Kinsey, whose pioneering research changed everything we think we know about sex. Visit kinseyinstitute.org to make an impact. Your donations can help support ongoing research projects on critical topics. You can also show your support by following Kinsey Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for supporting sex science. Hi, Venus, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. So we met earlier this year in Barcelona when I was teaching a study abroad course there with Sexual Health Alliance. And you kindly came and met with our students to talk about your work, and it was fascinating. So thank you for that. But a fun fact about you is that you became Spain's first professional sex toy tester, which honestly sounds like a pretty awesome title to have on your resume. So tell us a little bit about the story behind that. How in the world did you end up stepping into that role and making a living testing out sex toys?
Well, yes, it was great to meet you as well in Barcelona, and it's great to connect. In 2009, I started a sex blog, and I'm so glad that I had no plan, because I think a lot of the time there's a lot of pressure to have some kind of business plan, but I'm really glad I was open to what was going to unfold. So I was very well known in Spanish media in around 2010 to 2017, actually. So I was writing for El País, which is Spain's biggest news site. I've written about 100 articles for El País, and I was a big sex toy connoisseur and lover at the time. And because of my content and my media profile, I started to receive free sex toys. But I had one special one that I really liked, so I was kind of like, I was kind of less than impressed with the ones I was getting. But then in parallel, a local sex shop, an online sex shop, contacted me and asked me to make reviews or some kind of content or link exchange thing on my own website. And I put 2 and 2 together and I started making sponsored reviews. And I was really inspired by the Love Honey website at the time, because back then they used to have a really good product page with these different criteria to look at how do you evaluate a sex toy. It's not just about I like it or I don't like it. There's a lot more to it than that. So I came up with my own format and my own template. I created a word called orgasmobility. So I'm kind of classifying sex toys according to different criteria. So I started doing it in Spanish, and I was the very first person to do this in Spain.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a cool story. And, I appreciate what you said about when you started your sex blog, not really having a plan, because it was the same thing for me. So when I started out my career, I got a job as a college professor. I was a social psychologist by training, and I thought that I was going to have that job for life. But my life circumstances took me in a different direction. I moved across the country to be with my partner, and I had to jump off the tenure track. And so I had to kind of create like a fallback plan. And that's when I started my sex blog and started writing a textbook. And I didn't have a plan for where that would go. It was just like, hey, maybe this is something that could turn into something else later. And it turned out that it did, right? Because writing that sex blog opened the door to me becoming a Playboy columnist. And then that led to me getting a book deal to write a mass market book. And then that led to me like teaching these fantasy workshops all around the world. And it's like, I never had a plan for any of this. It's just like all was serendipitous and worked out. And I think that that's important for young folks in this field to recognize, is that so many of them feel this pressure to be like, here's my 5-year or 10-year plan and exactly how I'm going to make a go of it in this field. And it's like, when you hear stories like some other people in our field have, it's like, there was no 5 or 10-year plan behind it. It was just something where you kind of went with the flow. And, it's not to say that you shouldn't have one of those long-term plans, but things just don't always go the way that you think they're going to when you try and map it out in those ways.
Absolutely. And actually, I was also a Playboy columnist here in Spain. I made a column for Playboy, the very last edition, actually. But I was also a GQ columnist for about a year. And it was so crazy because when I started my blog, I did the worst email outreach campaign that I've ever done. I didn't really know what I was asking for, but I wrote something in the subject line saying, do you want to collaborate with me? I've just written this book with Erica Lusk. That was my first ever project, was a book called Love Me Like You Hate Me. Because I thought I had a book. I wrote to all of the media outlets in Spain, and the GQ director wrote back to me and said, it's such a pleasure to have you in my inbox. Call me. And I was terrified. It was like the best case scenario. And it took me a few days to call him. And then he told me to write an article. It took me a few months to write the article because I'd never written an article in Spanish. I was really starstruck. When I finally wrote the article, the graphic designer says, send us a bio or profile pic for your new column. And I was like, column? Oh my God. It was so crazy. So it just got better and better and better. And that's something that I've really enjoyed in my own career, is how just emails popping into my inbox have actually directed my journey. Even becoming a YouTuber, which was something that happened a bit later, because I was writing reviews for my website. But after working with local shops, I started to work with brands. And that's when I started making content in English. And then people asked me for videos. So I started a YouTube channel. So everything was kind of leading me to the next step. Mm-hmm. I'm quite shy naturally. So it wasn't something I would have chosen for myself. So it was really cool to have that guidance, because you need that sometimes when you're doing stuff as a freelance, as a solopreneur. Sometimes you can feel really lost and you don't really know who to connect with. And that's something I really treasured about meeting you in Barcelona, because I feel that I don't really have any in real life experiences with people who have the same mission as I do. I mean, all of my in real life experiences are social, which is great. But to be with people who are in the industry for, seeing it as a vocation, it's a mission, it's something more than work. There's a big feeling behind it. There's a big mission, and I found that really, really special.
I resonate with so much of what you said, kind of like one thing just leading to another, because that's been the story of my career. Now, when you were speaking with my students, you mentioned that you've tested over 1,000 sex toys to date and that you still have each and every one of them at home. Now, I don't think I have anywhere quite near 1,000 toys, but I do have several hundred of them because I've worked with a lot of sex toy companies over the years, and they've given me a ton of free samples. And I'm actually running out of room in terms of where to store them. So I've just resorted to stashing them in random places. So, I mean, if you open a drawer, a cupboard, or closet in my house, odds are you're probably going to find some sex toys in there. So how does one store 1,000 sex toys anyway?
Well, I have a spare room. I have a room just for the toys. And in a conversation with the Barcelona Erotic Museum, they told me to keep the boxes. That's very important because it's going to be worth a lot more in a few years. And as you know, technology evolves quite quickly. So I have everything in its original box. And I've bought these big transparent plastic boxes. So everything is classified. So I have the G-Spot box or the Bullet box. And then when there are lots of products from a certain brand, then I have the branded boxes as well. So I know how to find everything relatively quickly. I have to move around a lot of boxes, but I do have everything pretty much in order. And I have one box, which is the battery operated box, which is really interesting trend that I've seen over the years I've been in this industry. And those ones look incredibly scary because they're kind of disintegrating now. And it makes you realize how important it is to have safe materials in our industry.
Yeah, so you're basically running your own sex toy museum out of your spare
Yeah,
bedroom.
that's the idea in the future. So I want to kind of do a deal when, in 10, 20 years, when they're really vintage. I want to have my collection doing the rounds with a framed review next to the artifacts. Yeah.
I've mentioned on the show before that, with all these sex toys I have sitting around, I kind of want to get like an old library card catalog and use that to kind of like store and organize all the toys. And it'll be like the Dewey Decimal System for sex toys. So I can have it organized in some way, but eventually I'll get around to it. For now, the toys are just stashed everywhere. Before the show, you were telling me that a sex toy once changed your life and it totally changed your outlook on relationships too. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience? What was it that shifted for you in that moment?
Well, I think a lot of people, maybe women especially, I think this can apply to anyone, but I think a lot of the times we can empathize with the situation of being with someone who is giving you amazing sex, but who is emotionally toxic. And almost that emotional toxicity can make the sex even better, which is this very self-destructive loop that you can get in. I was in a time in my life when I thought this pattern has got to end because I was living with someone and it was getting very, very toxic. And as soon as I left that relationship, I walked out and left that apartment. It was like, oh my God, I need to change this pattern. I went to live with a friend and she was really into Sex and the City. So she was watching the episode when Charlotte gets the rabbit. And I was like, I need to get one of those. I need to get one of those. So that was what was the inspiration for getting my own first rabbit. And it was interesting because we went to this shop. We bought the same rabbits and not the same one, but two different ones. And then when we came home, we both went to our respective rooms and I just put it inside. I was like, oh, not really working. And then I went to the sofa and then she spent hours in the room and then she came out like in a trance. Oh my God, it's amazing. And I thought it was my idea. It didn't really work for me. So it took me several months of just trial and error until one day it just clicked for me. And I realized that the clicking was about mind, body, connection. And I realized then with any sex toy can kind of like do it for me now. But what was really interesting about that in terms of how it changed my life is that it really helped me to unblock or kind of disengage from that type of dynamic. When people think that, say, sex toys can replace a partner, I think it replaces bad partners and bad sex. So I'm coming from a place of more satisfaction if I'm choosing a partner or going on dating sites. It's not that kind of feeling of drunkenness because, I mean, being very horny is almost like being drunk because you can make very bad decisions sometimes. So now I'm kind of a bit more grounded in my decision making when it comes to the emotional side of things. I think it's really important to kind of tap into your body's yearning. And also that's at the beginning of the film Hysteria about the first vibrator. They have a lot of, obviously it's a fictionalized story, but it's a lot of women in the beginning are talking about this yearning, this kind of desire they don't really know how to satisfy. And I think that's true of many women who are not quite connected to their bodies. We hear stories of so many women who have advanced ages and they still haven't had an orgasm. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something missing. There's a disconnect. And I think it's about reconnecting or just connecting if you've never felt that before. I think it's an emotional thing. I think sex toys are not just objects, they are experiences. Mm-hmm. They are very empowering tools.
You read my mind. That was actually going to be my next question for you, was because, you often say that sex toys are more than just products. They're also experiences. So can you just unpack that a little bit more for us? What does it mean for a sex toy to be an experience as opposed to just a mere product?
Well, one thing I think is interesting about female use of sex toys, it has to look kind of elegant, but we're not looking at the toy during it. It's more about how something feels in your hand and your inner world. Maybe you're watching something or maybe you're reading something, but it's an experience. And also, especially for a couple, that's a bit more apparent because when a couple buy a sex toy, it's about hope. It can represent hope or getting that spark back. And also for a single person using it, it's about pleasure. It can be something that's quite liberating as well. It can be a reclamation of your own sovereignty as a sexual being. So I think it's way more than a frivolous object. And I've had to, encounter lots of these types of judgments in the past about sex toys when I explain what I do. A lot of people assume that I have a whole collection of phallic objects, right. Or everything's realistic, and that's not true at all. It really is about the inner journey for me and that mind-body connection. And then a sex toy is just the tool that takes you there.
Yeah. And, that is true. That is a common misconception about sex toys is that they're all just replicas of penises. And, it's just dildos and vibrating dildos and so forth. But there's so much more to the world of sex toys than that. But I think that's also a misconception that leads a lot of heterosexual men in particular to not really explore the world of sex toys because they think that they're just for women, or that, if they were to use a sex toy, that would somehow mean that they're gay, right? Because they associate sex toys with just these very phallic objects. And so again, that's why it's important to have this more kind of expansive view and understanding of sex toys. And we'll get into that a bit more a little bit later. Every year, people fall for the same Black Friday trap. They buy more gadgets, more clutter, and more stuff that they've already forgotten about by the time the new year rolls around. This year, get yourself something that lasts a lifetime and that's actually good for you and your relationship. Meet Beducated. They have over 150 expert-led courses that cover everything from sensual massage to oral techniques, kink exploration, better communication in bed, and so much more. And there's new content added every month. Beducated is the sex ed that you wish you always had, and it can help you to unlock pleasure that you didn't know you could experience. And right now, you can get 65% off the yearly pass locked in for life. That's just $69 a year, which, let's face it, is the perfect price. So this Black Friday, invest in something that never goes out of style: your pleasure, intimacy, and confidence. Take advantage of Beducated's best deal of the year by using LayMiller69 as the coupon code, and try it risk-free with a 14-day money-back guarantee. Check the show notes for the link and be sure to use code LayMiller69 to get your discount. Trust me, your future self and your partner will thank you. You've been involved in so much more than just testing out sex toys. You've actually participated in their design and development. And I think that's such an interesting aspect of sex toys that most people kind of take for granted. I mean, when we pick up a toy off the shelf, most of us don't give a glancing thought to how that toy even came into being. And odds are it was probably a months, if not years long process that took like some serious engineering. And there were probably a whole bunch of other toys in development at the same time that will just never see the light of day because they just didn't kind of work out. So I wondered if you could talk to us a bit about the process behind how a sex toy comes into being. What does the design and development phase look like?
Well, I don't think it's true that every company emphasizes the importance of that
True.
stage. I think some things have come out from very reputable brands, and you think this was not tried on a human. I mean, it's terrible. So I think a lot of the times that a lot of companies want to bypass that stage because it gets expensive. Getting prototypes is very expensive each time. The very first experience I had, I actually created the weirdest looking toy you've ever seen called the O Venus, from a local brand here in Spain called Adrian Lastic. And I had this idea of, I'm very proud about originality in all of my work. So I made up this very weird toy that has a 3-pronged part for the external, and then you just insert a very small part in the vagina. So you're kind of opening the labia and then having this clitoral stimulation. It has this big handle. So people look at it and are like, how does that work? But the experience was really interesting because I had lots of prototypes that came from China. And then I didn't realize that when you look at a drawing or even a 3D printout, when you look at the actual toy, it was a lot more flexible than I thought. Like the 3 prongs were just completely floppy. I was like, that's not going to work. So the people who were creating it had no idea. I mean, they just don't think about how does a clitoris need to be touched. Mm-hmm. So I kept saying, I was trying to use all of my tools of my fantasy library to try and like it. But I kept saying, no, this is not. So I went through several prototypes until I found the one which was really good. And that was my first experience, but it did take months to actually come up with the right one. And then after that, there's the real one comes out, and then everyone's like, what is that? That's so weird. But then after that, I started working as a consultant, which is interesting. I've designed some toys from scratch. They've always been kind of like a Frankenstein. I've taken several toys that I like, some aspects of each one, and then come up with a new idea, which looks nothing like the ones that inspired it. And yeah, so what's really interesting is it really made me understand and appreciate the virtues of teamwork, because sometimes me as a user, I can have my ideas, but then the engineer will think about where to put the motor inside, or let's make it flexible, or, there's some of those details that someone else who kind of knows how to draw will add to it, and then someone else adds their bit. So I just love this layered approach of teamwork for pleasure. It's just really cool. And also I think my experience and my input was very valuable for the engineers because they don't really have that input. I've worked on apps as well as actual products. So having that intuitive side as a user, but also an experienced user has been very valuable. And something for me is very easy to do with all my experience. And I know that it's valuable as well.
Yeah, I've worked with some companies in terms of product ideation as a consultant, and those meetings are fascinating because they have people like me who are there who are, sex educators and psychologists and so forth. But then they also have chemical and mechanical engineers who are there too. And then they've got marketing people, and then they have quote unquote normal people who, are just like the users of the toys. And it's sort of like this meeting of a bunch of different minds where people are talking about, well, what is it that we need in this particular toy or product? How can we make this better? What's working? What's not working? And you kind of need all those different perspectives because somebody can say, well, I would like it to be more like this, but how do you get that toy or product to be more like that? And that's where you need the engineers to come in and say, what is actually possible and feasible and what can you do here? And so for the companies that are doing it right, it's a very complicated, complex, laborious, time-consuming process. But I think you're so right that there are lots of companies out there that aren't taking that approach. And instead, what they're doing is they're just looking at other toys that are on the market and selling well, and then they're just kind of making their own replica of it, right? And that's where they're not really advancing or taking things in another direction, but where you're also getting some products that are out there that just aren't as good because they didn't have the product testing behind it. Somebody was just trying to replicate what another company was trying to do. So it's why you have all these knockoff products on the market as well.
Yeah, also things which just look painful.
Yeah.
When you think about car rage or road rage or whatever, but I think there's toy rage as well.
Rage.
When you've invested a lot in a product and it's not working, I mean, that can be incredibly disappointing, especially the app controlled ones. Because remember, if a couple's buying something, there's app control. They want to kind of use it to connect. Maybe they're going through a rocky time, and then it's not working, and you can get very angry. So there's so many variables, especially with the app stuff. Sometimes the sensors don't work through water, and we are water. So sometimes that can create a bit of a disconnection and things like that.
Yeah, totally. So what makes for a well-designed sex toy anyway? I mean, having reviewed and tested over 1,000 toys, are there any qualities, materials, characteristics, or features that would kind of signify the hallmarks of a good toy? Or in other words, is there a way to tell the good toys from the bad ones? Because there are so many toys on the market. Lots of them are great, but like I said, the market's also flooded with a lot of cheap and inferior and imitation products. So how do you tell what's worth your money and what isn't?
I think as a user, there are three big things. When I refer to vibration here only, I know there are lots of different types of stimulation right now. But for example, if we're talking about a vibrator, I think the shape is really important. It has to go with the anatomy. And also the material is important. And then the strength of the motor. It has to be rumbly, deep rumbly, not buzzy. That's super important. I think it's important as well that the motor is located next to the point of stimulation, which might sound basic, but you'd be surprised at how many toys, let's say a phallic vibrator will have the motor closer to the handle than the actual tip. So that happens with
that
many
doesn't make
toys.
A lot of sense.
It would if you maybe using it internally, but that's a myth that all toys are used internally. A lot of those types of toys are used externally, a lot of the time. So that's something that's kind of interesting. And also taking into consideration the anatomy. And I did a lot of research when I was especially looking at my very first toy, because I had to research the distance between the clitoris and the vagina, because that's important when it comes to dual stimulation. It's called the CV distance. And I found that there was something online saying it was between 1.5 centimeters and 4.5. So 3 would be in the middle. And I just measured myself. So 3, I'm perfect for this job. Kind of in the middle. But if you're making a rabbit, you've got to take into consideration these anatomical differences so that these elements are flexible so they can adjust to different people's anatomy. And also it's something I've learned, I don't know if other users would agree with me, but size is less important with toys because toys tend to be a bit firmer than a penis. And also with a toy, you're not having all of that as much build up. Maybe we should have a lot more self seduction and self foreplay rather than just going toy genitals, you know? But in general, I find it's just harder to insert a toy than a penis, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
And if I'm alone in that, I've not really shared that with other industry experts. But it's less important that kind of those dynamics of size. You can get lots of satisfaction with something quite small, and for the G spot.
Yeah, so it really is going to depend a lot on how you're going to use the toy and what kind of stimulation you want. And then also on your own unique anatomy. So, I mean, you brought up the clitoral vaginal distance, which is something that we've actually known for a long time is a big predictor of how women orgasm during penetrative sex. And this goes back to some pioneering work that I talk about in my textbook, The Psychology of Human Sexuality, where there was this woman, her name was Marie Bonaparte, and she was surveying her friends to find out what their clitoral vaginal distance is, because she kind of had this theory that, the smaller that distance was, that the easier it would be to be able to orgasm during partnered sex, because you're going to get more clitoral friction and stimulation in those cases. And so she, collected all these data points from friends. And then apparently she had like a larger distance. And so she actually went to doctors to try and have them move the location of her clitoris to see if that would make it easier for her to orgasm. But it ended up damaging her clitoris in the process. And, it's kind of an unfortunate end to the story, but she collected all of this valuable data that actually showed us for the first time that, hey, clitoral vaginal distance matters. And it is this important predictor of women's pleasure. And it's sometimes referred to as the rule of thumb, because if the distance between the clitoris and the vagina is equal to or less than the width of a thumb, basically you're likely to come. That's kind of like the idea behind it. But if you have that larger distance, it makes it a little bit harder during partnered sex. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to orgasm during penetrative intercourse, just that you might want to try different positions or use toys or other things to kind of facilitate orgasm in those cases.
What date was that? Because it sounds like a very ancient name.
Yeah,
it was history.
It was a while ago. I don't recall the exact date off the top of my head, but we're talking something like I think 100 or so years ago.
Oh, wow.
This was a while
advanced.
back.
It was person.
It was very advanced. So something that you talk a lot about in your work are the benefits of using toys. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you've learned. So you've mentioned, for example, that toys can represent hope for couples who have lost the spark in their relationship. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the ways in which toys can help to rekindle connection, or even just to help couples communicate more openly about sex?
Well, I think the first port of call to open that conversation is a wand massager. Because I think a lot of people be like, oh, I don't want toys, it's going to replace me. There's this idea of a toy replacing a penis, whatever. But I think when everyone loves a massage, so if you get a wand massage around, you start on someone's shoulders, it suddenly becomes, oh, actually, carry on. So I think that can be a great way just to kind of open up the conversation a little bit. I think that's a great gateway product into more things. And something I just really love, I think if one partner is tired, rather than having a kind of a game over type of conversation, you can just watch them. I think it opens up the possibilities a lot more. And a lot of my content, I've come up with this idea called the sexual sequence. And it's basically like this. This is like 95% of heterosexual encounters, which is kiss, caress, undress, manual stimulation, optional oral sex, penetration, male orgasm, game over. And I think most encounters follow that sequence. And I propose remove the penetration, remove the male orgasm, and let's make a new sequence. And I think sex toys allow us to make a new sequence. So rather than, oh, I'm tired tonight, how about you just watch someone, use a toy? That can be a really, really cool thing. And also with this, what I found that's super interesting, especially since the pandemic, is that there are a lot more wearable toys now. And there's a more emphasis on the tease rather than the orgasm. And I think that's really cool, because not everything is orgasm. Orgasm is super important, super nice, but it's just about being on the edge all the time and having that complicity and the fun factor and connection, really, especially if you go out and about and someone's pressing on the phone and you're like, that's this really cool thing you can do in a restaurant. Every time the waiter comes and you're like pressing someone's panty vibe and they're like really embarrassed. I think having humor, it can really connect us through humor. So things like that especially these wearables, can bring a sense of playfulness, which I think is really, really important. It's almost like a preliminary, it's more like a foreplay, it's adding to foreplay rather than so your partner can still deliver that orgasm to you if you want, And also
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, a lot of women do need clitoral stimulation during penetration. So having a toy is another way to facilitate that. But I think one toy which I think is a bit underrated actually is the cock ring. I mean, cock rings are terrible for so many reasons. I mean, because what's happening with a cock ring is that with that, you're not getting that constant connection with the clitoris. But I would propose just putting the cock ring on these two fingers instead, and then just spooning from the back. You can just use it on your fingers instead, and it's not going to slip off, and use it as a clitoral stimulation stimulator. So there's so many ways to use something during penetration. It's not a cock ring.
So, I mean, sex toys, I think in many ways are an invitation to rewrite your sexual scripts, right? And to say that sex doesn't have to follow this like linear or sequential pattern that it tends to follow for so many people. So, yeah, that is one of the many benefits of these toys in terms of how they can help couples or people in any type of relationship, no matter how many partners you have, to connect more. Now, I had one other question for you about your experiences as a sex toy tester. So again, having tested over 1,000 toys over a period of several years, you've probably seen the industry and the toys themselves evolve pretty dramatically. So what trends or innovations excite you the most right now, whether in terms of technology, design, inclusivity, sustainability? Like, what do you like about, some of the new toys that are coming out today?
People say to me, is there always something to write about a new toy? And I'm looking for new things to write because I get bored of my own template, which I talked about earlier. I want to have things which are fun to write about. So as mentioned earlier, I think the wearable trend has been quite significant because it really does open up different ways of interacting with a partner. And that's what I really love as well, because I think at first, when we go back to the days of the jelly rabbit, I think because people assumed that you needed to have something phallic. I had a lot of men in my life who were intimidated by my rabbits. So I think when the sex toy is not resembling a penis anymore, there's more inclusivity of the toy in the relationship. That's really changed. The apps have really changed things as well. It's not just for long distance control. I think that just opens up new ways of using toys, such as engaging like audio erotica. I'm actually the author on the Satisfier app. So on the Satisfier app, I have a lot of erotic stories. I've narrated them as well. And when you listen to one of my stories, the vibrator actually is in sync with the story. So it starts off like very soft, and then it goes, and then he said this, and then you reach the climax of the story. So you get into the peak, the full throttle vibration. So that's a really interesting way as well to discover your inner world, as well as having something external and physical happening as well. Again, I do like just press and go, because for me as a reviewer, it's a lot more work involved if there's an app. What I have to do, you have to try things manually and then with the app as well. So I think the trends of wearables are really interesting. Also, the materials have really improved a lot over the years. And also, I've seen the death of the battery-operated toy, which is as a welcome change, because I remember years ago when I started collecting sex toys, there were some, let's say, cheap ones that were battery operated. They would be in euros. They would be, let's say, less than 50 euros. And 50 euros and above, approaching 100, there would be the USB rechargeable ones. But they were never as strong at first. It's always the rabbits or the kind of battery ones which were stronger. And now, thankfully, it's more affordable now to get USB rechargeable toys with decent motors.
Sex toys have certainly changed a lot over time, and they've become better in a lot of ways as well. But thank you so much for sharing all of this, Venus. I really appreciate your insights, and I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation about sex toys and diving into some myths versus facts about them in the next episode. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Yes, thank you so much. My website is venusohara.org. My Instagram, Venus O'Hara. I'm also the host of the Orgasmic Lifestyle podcast.
And you have a new book out as well?
Yes, Orgasmic Manifestation. It's all about this and kind of quite esoteric about how to use orgasm to manifest your dreams. And I have an exercise in there about how to consecrate a sex toy with intention. It's really cool. This is the money one. This is the love one, It's kind of cool. So that's another way of using sex toys as literally as magic wands.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I might have to go give that a try. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.